Night settles over a desert road. Torches gutter in the wind. Somewhere beyond the dark, an empire waits, and another dares it to blink. Men march forward, believing history bends to courage. By dawn, the sand will remember their names longer than Rome ever did. The story does not begin with a single battle. It begins with a line that was never drawn. To the west stood the Roman Empire, a machine built on roads, discipline, and the promise that order could be imposed on chaos. To the east rose the Parthian Empire, a realm of distance and movement, where power traveled faster than legions and loyalty bent like a bowstring, not a wall. Between them lay a vast frontier, cities, rivers, deserts, alive with trade, fear, and ambition. Romans did not think in borders the way we do now. They thought in reach, in supply lines, in how far a command could echo before it faded into dust. Beyond that distance, authority thinned, and in the east, authority thinned fast. Merchants crossed the Euphrates carrying silk, spices, and rumors. Client kings swore loyalty today and reconsidered tomorrow. Every treaty was temporary. Every alliance came with a hidden price. This was not a line on a map. It was a living wound, opening and closing with every season. Rome believed itself unstoppable. It had broken Carthage. It had swallowed Greece. It had humbled kings who once thought themselves divine. And so the question crept into Roman minds, whispered first, then spoken aloud. Why not the East? Why not push past the rivers and make the world whole? One man decided to answer that question with steel. Marcus Licinius Crassus was rich beyond measure, powerful beyond restraint, and desperate for glory. Gold had given him everything except memory. He wanted a victory that would echo like thunder through history. The East promised that echo. In the heat near Carrhae, Roman certainty collapsed. Parthian horsemen did not stand and die the way Roman enemies were supposed to. They moved, they vanished, they returned. Arrows fell like rain with no storm in sight. Shields became coffins, discipline became confusion. When the dust settled, Rome had lost more than soldiers. It had lost the illusion that the East could be conquered by force alone. The defeat at Carrhae was not just a military disaster, it was a psychological fracture. For the first time in generations, Rome had met a rival it could not simply absorb. The frontier did not retreat, it stared back. Yet Rome never learned how to let go. Campaign after campaign followed. Emperors marched seeking closure. Cities were taken, banners raised, victories announced. But every advance carried a hidden weakness: distance. Supplies stretched thin, garrisons grew isolated, revolts flared behind the lines. The land itself resisted permanence. This is where the story truly lives, not in triumph, but in strain, in soldiers who realized too late that bravery could not replace water, in rulers who learned that capturing a capital did not mean owning a people, in a frontier that punished arrogance and rewarded patience. If you're drawn to these moments where history holds its breath, where empires gamble everything on one decision, stay close. Some stories only reveal their truth if you keep listening. Rome and Persia did not clash because they hated each other. They clashed because neither could exist without testing the limits of the other. And the frontier, that restless space between worlds, was about to prove that some boundaries are enforced not by walls, but by time. The march east was not over, but from this moment on, it would never be simple again. The frontier breathed. It expanded when legions arrived and contracted the moment they turned their backs. Rome called this influence. The East called it survival. After Carrhae, Roman leaders told themselves the disaster had been an exception, a failure of leadership, not of destiny. The solution, they believed, was refinement, better roads, stronger forts, more obedient kings. Control did not have to look like conquest. It could wear a softer face. Client rulers became Rome's favored tools. Crowns were placed carefully on local heads, men who spoke the language, knew the tribes, and promised loyalty in exchange for protection. On parchment, it looked brilliant. Rome saved money, bloodshed was minimized, the frontier seemed stable. But stability was a performance. Every client king balanced on a knife's edge. Lean too far toward Rome, and local elites whispered treason. Lean too far away, and Roman legions appeared at the gates. Loyalty was not inherited. It had to be purchased again and again, with marriages, hostages, and favors that hollowed kingdoms from the inside. Rome told itself these lands were already half Roman. Taxes flowed west. Latin law crept into courtrooms. Statues of emperors stood in city squares far from Italy. Yet beneath the stone and ceremony, nothing truly belonged to Rome. The eastern landscape punished certainty. Unlike Gaul or Spain, there were few great rivers flowing conveniently toward Roman ports. Supply trains crawled over mountains and deserts, bleeding time and men. An army could win a battle and still lose the campaign to thirst, distance, and delay. This was the quiet truth Roman senators avoided. An empire could not live on victory alone. It lived on logistics. And in the East, logistics were fragile. Still, the temptation never faded. Each new emperor faced the same ghost, the idea that if he acted decisively, if he pushed just a little further, Rome's eastern problem would finally be solved. The frontier was a challenge to pride, and pride is patient. It waits for the right man to listen. Meanwhile, Parthia watched and adapted. Its power did not depend on fixed lines or permanent garrisons. Authority flowed through families, alliances, and speed. When pressure mounted in one region, strength shifted elsewhere. Rome took cities. Parthia preserved influence. To Romanize, it looked like weakness. In reality, it was resilience. This difference in worldview shaped everything. Rome built walls to define control. Parthia allowed space to absorb pressure. Rome needed certainty. Parthia thrived in ambiguity. Even so, moments came when the balance wavered. Roman armies marched east and crowned kings in Armenia. Parthian nobles sent sons west as hostages, learning Roman customs while quietly resenting Roman arrogance. Each side believed it was winning without realizing it was only maintaining equilibrium. If this story grips you, if you feel the tension of empires circling each other without striking the final blow, remember moments like this are easy to miss. They don't announce themselves with triumph. They reveal themselves slowly to those who stay with the story. The frontier endured not because Rome was weak, but because strength alone was not enough. Power had to be fed, supplied,
accepted, and the East accepted nothing permanently. Somewhere beyond the Euphrates, a new emperor was already imagining a different outcome, a cleaner victory, a decisive march that would silence centuries of frustration. The frontier listened, and it waited.
When Trajan looked east, he did not see uncertainty. He saw an unfinished sentence. He was a soldier before he was a ruler. His confidence came from movement, roads built forward, bridges thrown across rivers, orders carried without hesitation. Under his reign, the Roman Empire expanded like a tide that believed the shore would eventually surrender. The frontier had resisted others. Trajan intended to make it obey. The opportunity arrived, dressed as duty. Armenia wavered, its throne contested, its loyalties split. Rome had intervened before. This time, Trajan decided intervention was not enough. He marched not to correct the balance, but to replace it. Legions crossed the Euphrates with banners high and confidence intact. Roads were cut where none had existed. Cities opened their gates, some in fear, others in hope. To Roman eyes, it felt like destiny finally unfolding the right way. Then came the deeper march, past the familiar, past the manageable. Trajan drove his armies into Mesopotamia, following the twin arteries of the Tigris and Euphrates, believing rivers could tame distance. The land disagreed. Heat broke discipline, supply lines stretched thin. Garrisons became islands of stone in a sea that did not want them. Still, Trajan pushed on. When Roman forces entered Ctesiphon, the moment felt unreal. The Parthian capital, heart of a rival empire, stood taken. Rome had done what generations of commanders could not. Coins were minted, titles claimed. Trajan stood at the edge of the known world and imagined the Persian Gulf as Rome's next horizon. For a heartbeat, the illusion held. But conquest is not possession. The city fell, yet the empire behind it did not. Parthian authority did not collapse because it was never centered in one place. Power scattered, regrouped, and returned. Revolts erupted behind Roman lines. Supply depots burned. Messages arrived too late to matter. The deeper Rome pushed, the louder the land protested. Mountains loomed ahead, cold, narrow, merciless. Beyond them lay the Iranian plateau, a world that had swallowed armies before. Trajan understood the risk. He also understood pride. Turning back would mean admitting that even victory had limits. The frontier answered for him. Uprisings flared across newly claimed territories. Cities that had welcomed Rome now resisted it. Jewish revolts ignited in the rear, stretching Roman strength across vast distances. The army that had marched forward with certainty now fought simply to hold what it had taken. Trajan's campaign did not fail in battle. It failed in reality. The emperor returned west exhausted, his triumphs hollowed by the cost of holding them. Within a year, Rome abandoned much of what it had claimed. The frontier slid back into place, as if it had merely been testing how far it could be pushed. Trajan died soon after, his dreams unfinished. His conquests were celebrated in stone, but quietly undone in policy. If this moment feels heavy, it should. This is where empires learn the difference between victory and permanence. If you want to understand how history quietly corrects arrogance, stay with this story. The lesson isn't over. Rome had reached its furthest breadth eastward, and the frontier
had exhaled.
After Trajan, silence settled. Not peace, but restraint. Rome stepped back from the edge and told itself the retreat was temporary. Official words spoke of strategy and prudence. Unofficially, everyone understood the truth. The East had been touched, and it had touched back. The frontier remained not as a failure, but as a warning. Trajan's successor, Hadrian, chose survival over spectacle. Where Trajan had advanced, Hadrian consolidated. Garrisons were pulled in, borders hardened, fortresses replaced ambition. Rome would no longer chase the mirage of total control in lands that consumed certainty. But restraint does not erase rivalry. Parthia endured, bruised but unbroken. Its decentralized nature, so often mistaken by Romans for weakness, proved its shield. When one region burned, another sustained the realm. When Rome withdrew, Parthian influence returned quietly, without triumphal marches or carved monuments. The frontier reset itself like a scar that never fully healed. Decades later, war returned, not from hunger for glory, but from fear. Plague and pressure gnawed at Rome's eastern provinces. Parthian power surged again, testing the limits. The Roman response came under Lucius Verus, whose generals marched east with a colder understanding of the land. They followed the rivers, they avoided the mountains, they fought to punish, not to possess. Once more, Ctesiphon fell. Once more, it changed nothing. Cities burned, armies withdrew, the frontier shifted slightly, then stopped. Rome gained influence, not dominion. Parthia lost prestige, not sovereignty. Each side learned how much pain the other could absorb without breaking. Yet beneath this familiar rhythm, something deeper was changing. Parthia's loose structure, so effective against conquest, strained under time. Powerful families competed, authority fragmented. The old balance held, but at a cost, and from the fractures arose a new force, disciplined and centralized, forged in reaction to centuries of Roman pressure. The Sasanian Empire emerged not as a continuation, but as a correction. Where Parthia had relied on flexibility, the Sasanians built control. Where Rome respected ambiguity, the Sasanians demanded clarity. They reimagined kingship as sacred, authority as absolute, borders as lines worth defending with relentless force. For Rome, this was unfamiliar territory. The frontier no longer breathed the same way. It stiffened. Conflicts grew sharper. Wars became more brutal, more deliberate. The old equilibrium, fluid, negotiated, temporary, began to erode. If this transformation feels ominous, it should. This is how long rivalries mature, quietly, structurally, beyond the notice of those focused only on battles. If you're still here, listening closely, you're already seeing the shape of what's coming. Rome and Persia had tested each other for centuries. Now they faced a version of the rivalry that would demand more than endurance. The frontier had stopped drifting. It was preparing to burn.
The old rules no longer applied. When Rome faced the Sasanian Empire, it was no longer dealing with a flexible rival that absorbed pressure and waited. This was a power that answered force with force, ideology with ideology. Kings no longer ruled merely by blood or tradition, but by divine mandate. To resist them was not just rebellion, it was sacrilege. The frontier hardened into a battlefield that never truly slept. Sasanian armies struck with precision, not spectacle. Fortresses fell. Cities were looted with intent, not impulse. When they marched west and sacked Antioch, the message was unmistakable. Rome's core was no longer untouchable. The war had crossed from the edges into the heart. Rome responded, as it always had, with endurance. Legions were raised, taxes increased, emperors rotated through the east, some competent, others desperate. Victories came, but they were temporary. Defeats came, and they lingered. Each side learned how deeply it could wound the other without delivering a killing blow. The frontier became a furnace that consumed generations. By the early 6th century, exhaustion hung over both empires like smoke. Then, Rome fractured from within. Civil war tore at authority, legitimacy, and supply. In that moment of weakness, the Sasanians surged forward, not cautiously, but decisively. They took Egypt. They reached Anatolia. For the first time, it seemed possible that Rome might finally collapse under Eastern pressure. But conquest has a price even victory cannot escape. The Sasanian advance stretched their own systems beyond tolerance. Occupied lands resisted. Supply lines broke. The sacred kingship that demanded total control now faced the same truth Rome had learned centuries earlier. Domination without acceptance is temporary. When Heraclius struck back, it was with fury sharpened by survival. Campaigns cut deep into Persian lands. The war ended not with triumph, but with mutual ruin. Both empires stood bloodied, hollowed, and barely standing. If you've stayed with this story this far, pause here. This is the moment where history holds its breath. Empires that once defined the world now struggle just to stand upright. These are the moments worth remembering, the quiet ones after the fire, when survival itself feels like victory. The frontier still existed, but it was exhausted. And in that exhaustion, something new was already moving, something neither Rome nor Persia was prepared to stop.
When the wars finally ended, there was no celebration. The Roman Empire stood alive but diminished, its treasury drained, its people weary of sacrifice. The Sasanian Empire stood victorious, yet fractured, its authority questioned, its divine kingship bruised by the very scale of its ambition. For centuries, these two powers had measured themselves against each other. Now, both were hollowed out by the effort. The frontier still lay between them, but it no longer mattered in the same way. Fields once trampled by marching armies were left untended. Cities rebuilt walls, but lacked the strength to fill them with men. Trade slowed, trust evaporated. The great rivalry that had shaped the ancient world had consumed its own foundation. And history, indifferent to pride, moved on. From the deserts and caravan routes south of the old frontier arose a force neither empire had truly understood. It did not arrive as an empire in the traditional sense, no ancient rival banners, no long-established dynasties. It arrived with belief, speed, and unity. Where Rome and Persia had bled each other slowly, this new power moved with startling momentum. By the time either side recognized the danger, it was too late. Persia fell first,
not because it lacked courage or armies, but because its strength had already been spent. Decades of total war had stripped it of resilience. Cities surrendered, not out of fear alone, but exhaustion. The Sasanian system, so rigid and controlled, shattered when its center failed. Rome endured longer, but only just. The eastern provinces slipped away. Egypt, the lifeblood of grain and stability, was lost. The empire that remained would survive, but it would never again command the world it once claimed. Its identity shifted, its ambitions narrowed. The frontier that had defined centuries of struggle faded into memory. And yet, this is not a story of failure. It is a story of limits. Rome and Persia were not destroyed because they were weak. They fell because no power, no matter how vast, can ignore geography, logistics, culture, and time. The frontier was not an accident. It was the natural answer to human ambition pressing against reality. Empires can win battles, they can conquer cities, they can rewrite maps, but they cannot command permanence. If you've listened this far, carry this thought with you. History does not always remember the loudest victories. It remembers the boundaries that refused to move, the quiet forces that shaped the world, not through triumph, but through resistance. The Roman-Persian frontier never truly broke. It simply outlived the empires that tried to master it.